Welcome, everyone. My name is AVI LEWIS. I'm an associate professor here at geography at UBC, and I am delighted to be the MC for this event. As we gather on Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh unceded territory, as always, I'm thinking tonight about some of the Indigenous leaders in the field of fossil fuel resistance. Obviously, there are as many responses to the fossil fuel industry within Indigenous communities as there are communities. And many are, as the Cliff Atleo well-read piece these days says, between a rock and a hard place when it comes to resource development. But as I was thinking about this event tonight, I was thinking about being with Reuben George, who's the manager of the Sacred Land Trust for the Tsleil-Waututh Nation in Kate's Park, Weyowitchin, in October. And we were shooting an extended land acknowledgement for this climate justice course that I'm teaching. And shout out to the Geography 302 students who are here from the climate justice course and the others from the climate emergency course and a new climate certificate that's being offered here. And Reuben was standing across the water from the TMX terminal, which when we first met there in 2010, hadn't been built yet. And he was reflecting on the question of climate justice in relation to this pipeline. And he said, the day they approved that pipeline was the day for me that reconciliation died. And I asked him, well, what does climate justice mean to you in the aftermath of this project? $17 billion of the cost of which will be lumped onto the public purse. And he said, when there was a mass mobilization of people who came from all over the region to say that this is not an appropriate kind of development in that place. And under Indigenous leadership, they gathered in a huge, he said that mass mobilization was climate justice for me. And I thought about what that means. I thought about one of our great teachers who we lost too soon, Arthur Manuel of the Secwepemc people, who was also an elected chief of the Nisqualneth Indian Band for many, many years. And Arthur would love a campaign like Sue Big Oil. I first encountered Arthur in the 1990s when I was hosting a TV show, a political debate show, and he weighed in on a NAFTA tribunal. So as an Indigenous nation, he intervened in a trade dispute between Canada and the United States on the question of softwood lumber. And Arthur's angle was that he was intervening on behalf of the United States. So everyone was like, oh, that got our attention. That's weird. Why? His argument was that the Canadian government's subsidies towards the lumber industry represented an unfunded liability because Indigenous land rights mean that Indigenous communities have an inherent right to all of those resources. And the Crown, the Canadian state, seizing those resources, selling them to the United States, was misrepresenting itself in the deals because it had a huge unfunded liability, which was the resolution of those Indigenous inherent rights. They had a monetary value. They couldn't just sell all of that lumber and pretend that they didn't have legal responsibilities that had already been decided by the courts. So this is I just bring this up as a question instead of doing a ritual land acknowledgement to actually think about some of the contributions in the question of this interface between the inherent rights of Indigenous people, resource extraction and development, and the Canadian state. In this case, we have a campaign called Sue Big Oil, which has obviously attracted lots of attention tonight. There are people here in the room, there are people watching on Zoom, and it's a campaign that's got a lot of attention because for me, and I just want to reflect briefly on this, and I'll introduce our panelists and we'll have some presentations and then a discussion. For me, people are in a state of existential anxiety when we confront the breakdown of the climate, which we see every day in every part of our lives, as well as the species extinction crisis, as well as the breakdown of many of our other social systems. And people feel like, what can we do? What can we as individuals do? Well, spoiler, very little. But when you connect with other people and work collectively, you can do a hell of a lot. And this is a great example of something, an ingenious use of existing mechanisms that gives people an opportunity to organize in local communities at the local municipal level, which is the most available and effectable level of government, and to come together in collective action and actually take aim at the forces that are destabilizing life on Earth, which is a precious gift. It's an amazing opportunity to be able to do something locally that actually addresses the cosmic forces that we're up against. $200 billion in profits of the top 5 oil companies on Earth in 1 year last year. Research that was published at the end of last year showing that the oil industry has made $3.5 billion of profit every day for the last 30 years. The money to pay for the damages, the climate damages that we're experiencing now, is there. We know it's there. And somehow we need a mechanism to get at it, because for all that they have net zero pledges now, like every other institution in society, the money is not forthcoming. The industry is not investing in renewable energy. The industry is certainly not investing in reparations for the damage that has been caused by the burning of fossil fuels. And so we need to find mechanisms, and this is an incredibly smart one. And I also think that we know that they knew what they were doing all these decades. And the research as it comes out is just like staggering. So on the poster, it says, you know, they knew, they profited. But when you look into it, and academics in the States, Naomi Oreskes and Jeffrey Supran, have been doing, who did the research that started the Exxon New meme and campaign and field of study, just released another huge piece of research just a couple weeks ago. And if you go and find Jeffrey Supran on Twitter and look at at least his Twitter thread of Exxon's projections from the 1960s on, 50s? 60s anyway, from the 60s and 70s. If you look at what they predicted would happen with carbon emissions and what actually happened, they were really good at it. Like, they didn't just know that the climate emergency was coming. They knew with incredible precision and data and science exactly how bad it would be. And the fact that they then embarked on a decades-long campaign of misinformation and disinformation and delay and denial and distraction, and they're still at it today, demanding tens of billions of dollars more of public subsidies for this mythical carbon capture technology, which is somehow going to allow them to produce oil and gas without creating emissions. This whole fiction and fantasy is part of a continuum of the industry's tactics to keep business as usual, which is choking our planet going indefinitely. So if you need a little shot of righteous rage, and then an outlet for that rage so that it doesn't just simmer away inside you, Sue Big Oil is here to help. I have been a fan of this campaign from the beginning, and I'm very, very happy to be here with 5 people who are engaged in different ways in this frame. I'll introduce them briefly. They will speak. Andrew might speak a few minutes longer because he's got a lot of the pieces of the puzzle, but you'll hear from everybody, and then we'll take some questions and have a chat, and then eat more food. Do I have your consent? Okay. So Andrew Gage is a staff lawyer at West Coast Environmental Law, is the project lead for West Coast's climate change campaign. And Andrew's been working on this question of accountability for fossil fuel companies for a very long time. Welcome, Andrew. Beside him, STEPAN Wood is a law prof right here, director of the Center for Law and Environment, and a Canada Research Chair in Law, Society, and Sustainability. Been on panels with this guy a couple of times. Besides STEPAN is ADRIANE CARR, one of the co-founders of the BC Green Party, longtime city councillor, and the local politician who moved the resolution in the last council to get Vancouver to jump on board the Sue Big Oil campaign, which was a game changer. Whether or not the game remains changed is something that we're going to talk about tonight. FIONA KOZA also works at West Coast Environmental Law and is the climate accountability strategist, and has been doing a lot of the nuts and bolts of the campaign. Where I live on the Sunshine Coast, we have a very active group who are organizing to try to get the Sunshine Coast Regional District to endorse the Sue Big Oil campaign. And whenever any of us have a question, we're like, Fiona. She emails you back instantly and she knows everything. So that's why Fiona's here. I'm not overselling you, am I? Okay, good. And MANVI or MANVI BHALLA. You can call MANVI or MANVI, whatever you like. We had a long conversation about it earlier. MANVI is the co-founder and president of Shake Up the Establishment, a group whose name is just awesome. That's all. You don't need to say more than that. And also works at Misinformed, which is a nonprofit focused on health promotion for women and gender diverse people. And so that's our panel. Welcome them if you won't mind. Thank you. So we're going to make sure and use the hand mic so that people on Zoom can hear as well. And Andrew's going to go first.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Avi. Thanks, everyone, for coming out, and thank you for the organizers for putting this together. I'm thrilled to be here. Quick show of hands. Who is fed up with what Greta calls blah, blah, blah? And by blah, blah, I'm using that in the technical meaning, where governments promise something and don't deliver and put short-term profits ahead of long-term solutions, but also where industry and governments spread misinformation and false climate solutions and move us in the wrong direction. We're all sick of that, and we have been for a long time. I was 15 in 1988 when internal, I had more hair then, when internal shell documents by scientists working at the company warned that burning fossil fuels would lead to changes to sea levels and weather that would be larger than any that have occurred over the past 12,000 years. A few years later, when I was 19 in 1992, the world's governments came together and signed the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and promised to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations and avoid dangerous climate change. I was 25 in 1998 when the American Petroleum Institute, Chevron, Exxon, and other companies secretly drafted their global climate science communications plan that said that victory will be achieved when those promoting climate action on the basis of science appear to be out of touch with reality.
Nice.
So every year we get more blah, 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 and we get more greenhouse gases being added to the heat trapping blanket of pollution that surrounds our planet, and we get just a little bit warmer. And we know that the main source of the greenhouse gases is the burning of fossil fuels. But what is the source of the blah, blah, blah? What compels our political, business, civic leaders to put short-term profits ahead of the survival of our planet, and certainly the health of our communities? During the same period, fossil fuel companies, as Avi mentioned, have made an awful lot of money, especially recently. And I'd suggest that there's a direct relationship between those two things, the blah, 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 and the money that these companies are making. In fact, we saw evidence of that just this week. In addition to announcing their huge profits in the last couple of weeks, Shell and BP both announced that they were going to stop moving ahead with their climate, slow down their move on climate solutions because they were just making too much money. The problem, of course, the problem is that these profits are an illusion. They only have these profits because we have separated the costs of climate change, the profits of the fossil fuel sector of oil, gas, and coal, which their investors get to pocket, from the costs of climate change, which we get to pay over and over again. And as long as that illusion exists, we're going to have more blah, blah, blah. And it's because of blah, blah, blah that over 600 people died in this province in 2021 from the heat dome. And it's because of blah, blah, blah that Vancouver is already paying $50 million each year to deal with the impacts of climate change and to prepare for future impacts. And they expect to pay $1 billion between now and 2100, over the next multiple decades, to deal with rising sea levels alone. And the Insurance Bureau of Canada, hardly a radical organization, says that if we want to stay safe, our local governments across the country should be spending $5.3 billion every year to get ready. So climate change is a huge cost, a rising tide of costs that we have not begun to think about. How much of that $5.3 billion per year does Shell, Chevron, or Exxon expect to pay?
Zippo.
It's nothing, right? The assumption is that we are paying for that. BC's local governments have no plan other than passing it on to taxpayers, with the exception of ADRIANE and a few others, to avoid us paying all of those costs. And the assumption is we pay all of it, no more. This is the So Big Oil campaign points out that it has never been legal to knowingly sell a product that will kill and destroy property. You know, if you do that, you will be taken to court and expected to pay, made to pay your fair share. Big tobacco, big asbestos, big pharma, all these industries learned that to their detriment. So the So Big Oil campaign calls on local governments to take action to protect us from the impacts of climate change, including by bringing a class action lawsuit, working together, communities pooling resources and together bringing a class action lawsuit against local governments, against global fossil fuel companies like Shell, Chevron, and ExxonMobil. If you haven't signed the So Big Oil Declaration, there are paper copies out front, and you can go to www.sobigoil.ca. Please join us. Of course, no one's saying that the fossil fuel industry is 100% to blame and there's no responsibility for anyone else. We are saying, of course, we all need to do our part. But if you are saying that we are all responsible, we all need to do our part, that means the fossil fuel industry also needs to do its part. And its part is big. It's just 5 companies are responsible for about 14% of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere today. 90 entities are responsible for almost 2/3. And the court case, the idea of a class action is about trying to force them to pay something and to begin to have that on their balance sheet so that not only that they make better decisions about business decisions, but also that governments don't see them as wonderful wealth creators that they should be subsidizing through carbon capture and storage, and that investors don't see them as wonderful business opportunities. Our entire view of this industry is skewed by the fact that they are not paying their fair share. The reason that we're not able to make the changes we need to make is because they are not paying their fair share. The class action, the moment it's filed, it begins to have an impact because the companies have to disclose to their shareholders they're being sued. And then very early on in the process, a judge is asked to rule on whether this should proceed as a class action. And as part of that, has to rule whether or not the case has merit, meaning it could be won. So very early on in the process, we would get an order from a judge saying, you know what, here's the legal principles that apply, and here's what the cities will have to prove in order to win this. At that point, the risk goes up exponentially for these companies. And of course, the ultimate goal is that they should have these liabilities on their balance sheets, and they should be paying Vancouver and other municipalities so that it's not just down to taxpayers. And it's not going to be 100%, but it will be, we need to talk about what their fair share is. And it's also to expose this industry as not being wealth creators, but climate debtors. So in July, the city of Vancouver became the first local government in Canada to vote to set aside funds for a lawsuit, $1 per resident. Thank you, Adrian, for the motion. Good for council for approving that. Thank you. Yep. But we need to see whether the new council continues to pilot that course. And I mean, we need to be clear here. The suggestions that this lawsuit is going to be expensive, and lawsuits are expensive, although by pooling resources, the costs can be kept manageable. It won't be West Coast getting that. It needs to be a team of lawyers who specialize in class action litigation. But fiscal responsibility here requires that our elected officials not just pass on the costs of climate change, these huge costs, to us. It requires that they actually look to see what they can recover. If you build a bridge and it falls down, you don't go, oh, well, it'd be beyond our jurisdiction to hold anyone accountable. Let's just build another bridge and spend more money. No, this is holding people responsible for their role in causing climate change. And that is absolutely essential if we're going to get anywhere and if we're going to keep ourselves safe. So we need other local governments across BC to be joining the fight. We need all of you to be talking loudly about how climate change is really costing us now. This is not some future far off cost. And that the fact is that the oil and gas industry and the fossil fuel industry generally is not paying its fair share. And we need to tell our local governments that we expect them to protect us from climate change, and that includes joining this lawsuit. Thank you very much. Please join us.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's a hard act to follow. Prepare to be bored. Now it's time for the law professor to talk. In 2019, I co-authored a letter from 28 leading legal experts saying that there's a solid legal basis for local governments in Canada to sue carbon majors for a fair share of the cost of the harms of climate change. And since then, the case for it has become even more solid. The case for climate accountability litigation has grown stronger as the impacts of climate change have unfortunately intensified. Climate science has advanced. Demands for corporate management of and disclosure of climate risks has increased. Legal recognition of people's right to live in a healthy and sustainable environment has spread globally, and the evidence of industry knowledge and deception have just continued to mount. Andrew has already described the logic of climate accountability litigation. It's very simple. Companies that profit from selling a product that they know will cause harm when used as intended should be liable for their share of the costs of that harm. So it is true that I keep saying it, fumbling the words. Climate accountability litigation is unprecedented in Canada, but you would be mistaken to confuse novelty of subject matter or novelty of the scale with actual novelty of legal theories or legal claims. Lawsuits like this, the Sue Big Oil campaign that West Coast Environmental Law is leading, can proceed on the basis of very well recognized legal theories and legal claims. One US judge dealing with a motion to dismiss a very similar case in Hawaii last year by the city of Honolulu refused to dismiss the lawsuit, saying that these lawsuits raise unprecedented but traditional common law claims based exclusively on well-established legal theories. So there could be several legal bases for claims like this. And here, take notes, there's going to be a quiz at the end of my remarks. They could sue for something called private nuisance. That's where you would argue that these fossil fuel companies have interfered unreasonably with the use and enjoyment of municipal property. Everything from infrastructure to seafronts, shores, and so on, to buildings and vehicles burning in wildfires. The fact that there's many polluters and that each of them makes a small but detectable contribution to the harm would not be obstacles to liability in private nuisance. Another possibility would be public nuisance. That is where the local governments would sue fossil fuel companies for interfering with the public's use of public lands and resources, or with the public's interests in health, safety, morality, comfort, or convenience. That's the phrase that's used in the legal authorities. Another possibility would be negligence for failing to take reasonable care to prevent reasonably foreseeable harm to local governments, or even conspiracy for engaging collectively in negligent or nuisance or otherwise wrongful activity while knowing or being in a position where they ought to have known that it would injure local governments. Certainly there will be some procedural and other hurdles getting the class certified, showing that the issues that are common to all the local governments outweigh the issues that would be individual to each particular local government, jurisdiction over foreign-based companies, proving, if you're suing in negligence, proving that these companies owed a duty of care to these particular communities. And there's a few other things, but none of them is insurmountable. There's a growing body of successful cases around the world that we can draw on, where these questions have been resolved in the favor of climate change plaintiffs. And most importantly, precedents of actions by local governments in various countries, including our neighbor next door, the United States. Local and state governments in 11 US states, I'm not sure if the number is still accurate, have launched dozens of lawsuits like this against carbon majors since 2017. These cases have so far overcome almost every legal hurdle that has been thrown up to them. Almost all of them are still at a preliminary stage that haven't been got to the stage where they're actually, looking at the merits of the legal claims. In the US, the main issue nowadays is whether they belong in state court or federal court. And that's an issue that doesn't even arise in Canada, so that needn't bother us. So far, the plaintiffs down there have won on that issue everywhere, including at 5 different courts of appeal. Only a couple have actually got to a stage where the actual merits of the claim have been tested. And there was one early case by New York City, which was dismissed because the claims it was raising were preempted by federal statute law. That's another issue that doesn't arise in Canada. But there's this other one, the one in Hawaii I just mentioned, which survived a motion to dismiss because the judge said it raises well-established common law claims. There are lots of other things I could say, but basically to conclude, climate accountability litigation by local governments against carbon majors is not pie in the sky. It has arrived in several countries, has a sound legal basis, and its time has come. Thank you.
Right on.
Hi, I thought I'd start by saying I'm a UBC master's degree graduate in geography.
All right.
Yeah,
The real conspiracy.
yeah. So the short version of my speech is this. Exxon knew their action was to dupe the public into doubting the science. Climate change has proceeded and accelerated. There are huge costs, lots of which are borne by the local governments, and polluters should pay. When I heard about the Sue Big Oil campaign, which was last July, I had very little time to pull a motion together to get to the last council meeting before the election, which is why it was a little bit rushed in terms of how I framed it, Andrew. And we did rewrite it. It landed on the council table in July. It was a fearsome debate. The vote was 6-5 in favor of my motion. The 3 ABC councillors all voted against it. My motion asked for the city to proceed with joining a class action lawsuit, and specifically to put an amount of money up to $1 per resident in the city, which would be about, if it was $1, $662,000, to put it in the operating budget for this coming year, for 2023. The election happened. There was a wholesale sweep. Every single position in the 3 different bodies that are elected in Vancouver that the ABC party, Better City, ran for, they won. They have a supermajority on all the boards. They, during the election, questioned the idea, well, they didn't question it. In response to the question by media of how they were going to pay for 100 new cops and 100 new nurses, the mayor now answered then saying, well, there's this money about Sue Big Oil, which of course made me sit up, take notice, and worry. We get to the after election, we're inaugurated, we're at our first number of council meetings, and there is a decision made by the council to not deal with the 2023 budget, operating budget, as is normally done by the end of December. Instead, they wanted time to go over it. In my mind, likely to find out where they can find the money to pay for the big asks that they have, or the big promises they've made to the public, like 100 new cops and etc. So they delayed it till March of this year. So we have not yet voted on that budget. However, to my surprise, The direction of council does not matter that there's an election. The direction of council was to put money in the budget for a Sue Big Oil campaign. To my surprise, there was no money put in our budget. So I cannot say at this point, but you can bet that I will question when we debate this as to whether that was a staff error or was there political influence in that kind of decision. I mean, it's absolutely wrong to have had any political influence. So right now, there is no money in the budget. We are going to receive the budget on February the 28th. At that time, we don't vote on it. At that time, the public can come to speak to the budget. So one thing I've got circulating through here is a petition. That's a petition where the names are going to come to me. You will also, though, agree to have your name be placed on the Sue Big Oil campaign. It will be, that's right. But what I'll be able to do is keep you informed of what's happening around the whole budget process and what's happening at City Hall and City Council. So that's, and at the end, whoever's got it, can you remember to give it to me, please? And you can sign the petition out there too. That's good too. So when we get to the budget on the 28th, it'll be speakers, no decision. On March the 7th, the budget will go to council. It'll be on our agenda for debate and decision. At that time, I intend to table an amendment to put money in the budget, which was intended to be there, to put money in the budget. It'd be great if there were people saying, yes, we think that should be happening and everyone should vote for it on council. I'm going to give you, and I'm going to divulge a bit of strategy on my part. I recognize that the ABC councillors are not exactly sympathetic to this whole Sue Big Oil campaign. However, I don't know how many of them are more worried about the money they're trying to find for all the things they promised the electorate versus just being philosophically opposed to getting money back to the taxpayers who put out money because of climate change. And let me tell you what those amounts are, because I asked staff. We are currently spending in the city of Vancouver $65 million a year to mitigate the climate crisis. That's to reduce our GHGs. We are now spending $50 million a year to repair the damage done by climate. So when we had the storm surges with the king tides that wiped out part of the seawall and Kitsilano Pool, when we've seen the extraordinary torrential rains that came in the November of a bit ago now, that, yes, it wiped out highways. It also wiped out streets, sidewalks, the drainage system, etc. So we've had to repair that. So that's 50 and 65 plus another $40 million in the operating cost to put all those programs in. The 50 and 65 are mostly capital projects. So the operating budget has to support those. So we're talking $155 million a year. That's a lot of money. Who's paying for it? Taxpayers are paying for it. In my mind, polluters should pay for the damage they cause. So I am hoping that this new city council will be very open to the persuasion of a large amount of people, especially young people. It's your future. Most of them have got kids. And I have to say, probably the most poignant moments in being on city council, my fourth term now, is when we've had young people come to speak to other climate motions that we put forward, who have said to us as councillors, I don't know if I'm going to have children. I don't know if I can bring children into this world knowing what climate is doing to it. So I hope you all come out and if you can't make it to a meeting, when you sign that, there's a QR code, you can check on it. We'll keep you informed as how you can send in by email. Also, your opinion to council, because that counts. And thank you all for coming here. Thanks for organizing this. And thank you to West Coast Environmental Law for giving us the opportunity to be part of a joint action municipal lawsuit in Canada.
Tim?
Yeah.
Thanks. Hi, I'm just going to be super brief. I wanted to speak to you for a few minutes about how you can get involved in the Sue Big Oil campaign.
Yeah.
Yes. Next slide, please. So to start with, the most important thing that you can do as a first step is to sign the Sue Big Oil Declaration. There's two important reasons for signing it. One is so that your voice can be counted. So when we go to our city councils, we can say this many thousand people in this community want you to sue Big Oil, join this class action lawsuit. So that's one reason to sign it. The other reason is so that we can keep in touch with you, so that if there's something important happening in your community, like there's going to be a vote on the budget and whether to include Sue Big Oil, or there's going to be, and some other events that you need that would be great to attend or sign some important petitions, then we can be in touch with you. So this is our website. And at the top corner, you can see sign the declaration. So that's one way you can sign it. There's also a clipboard out on the table outside where you can write your name down. We also have a poster with a QR code you can use and sign it on your phone. Next, please. So we have, the Sue Big Oil campaign is a collaboration of many different organizations. So while West Coast Environmental Law is the secretariat of the campaign, we are endorsed and we're partnering with a number of other organizations. And so there's approximately 30 organizations, and including we're partnering especially with the Georgia Straight Alliance, Shake Up the Establishment, and Force of Nature, and some others, and they're taking this campaign in also other exciting directions. So each organization comes up with its own idea of how they're going to promote the campaign or what they're going to do in their community. So if you're part of an organization and your logo isn't up there, maybe you can talk to them and they would be interested in partnering with us too, or at least endorsing the campaign and spreading the word about it. Next, please. So as an individual, other ways that you can help would be help by spreading the word on social media. Even right now, if you wanted to, you could write, hey, I'm at this awesome Sue Big Oil event, and our hashtag, I think maybe it's the next click is right there. Hashtag Sue Big Oil. And and on our website, we just have some graphics and language that you can download if you want some ideas for what to post, or if you wanted to develop some content and post it and tag us, and we'd be happy to share it. Next, please. Next, please. Next, please. And so other resources that we have out on the table, there are some posters. If you want to put one up in your favorite cafe or other community spot, you can grab some stickers and share them with your friends and post them in cool places. Next, please. And next. Yeah, and just a few. Roll it. Okay, pause. Oh, no, wait, there was a missing one. There was a missing slide, but it doesn't matter. I was going to tell you about an event that's coming up on February 22nd. They were hosting with investigative journalist and author Jeff Dembicki about his book called The Petroleum Papers. And I was going to say that event was organized by Sue Big Oil on the Sunshine Coast. And so that was going to bring me to the fact that we have these awesome teams in different communities across the province who are working to sue Big Oil. And so if you wanted, there's an awesome team in Vancouver that you could join. Or if you are from a different community, you can maybe start one there. We have groups already in Burnaby, in Victoria, starting up in Nanaimo, in Powell River, in Whistler, in Mission, and other locations. So it's really exciting to see all this momentum building and all these people who are really excited about the campaign. They're working to write to their city councils, to meet with their city councils, to raise awareness, to gather signatures on petitions. So these are all ways that you can also get involved if you're interested. And the other way, I wanted to now pass the floor to my colleague MANVI to talk about one other exciting way to get involved in the campaign. Sweet.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see some familiar faces. It's awesome to see students come out to events like this. Normally, I don't do notes. I kind of wing it, but there's important facts I want to read out. So I was kind of brought in for multiple reasons. Shake Up the Establishment is a partner on Subic Oil, but I'm also a PhD student here at UBC in IRES, and I'm also someone who's involved in supervising students as part of the Climate Justice Research Collaborative. So that's what I'm going to start off with because I'm talking to a UBC audience and I want everyone to kind of connect the dots with some of the themes shared here today about fossil fuel industry and UBC, and then why it's important for us to be involved in campaigns like this as well. So for starters, there's a huge hunger to address the climate emergency at UBC. I'm going to use the example of last term. I supervised 5 undergraduate students in the Climate Justice Research Collaborative, and they came out with this great report called Complicity in Climate Emergency, Investigation into the Links Between UBC and the Fossil Fuel Industry. This report, which I think everybody should read, and if you email me, I will send it to you. I'm going to read out like 3 facts from it, and I'm going to tie it all together. So join me on this interesting journey. They found that 7 of every 50 donors to UBC between 2008 and 2015 was connected to the fossil fuel industry. They found that Tech Resources donates to UBC and positions itself as a sustainability leader in doing so, gaining social license for their work. They found that because the fossil fuel industry gains social license and is enabled in greenwashing by its ties to UBC, for example, through UBC researchers having received at least 18.8 million in federal funding for fossil fuel industry partnered research since 1999. And most importantly, since the 2019 climate emergency declaration, when UBC supposedly divested, since that date, 2.3 million of federal funding for fossil fuel industry partnered research has still taken place here, which is terrible and disgusting. So that's a personal judgment.
Yeah, how do you really feel?
Yeah, I said it. So in many ways, researching ways to minimize harms associated with the fossil fuel industry, isn't that just like normalizing their presence in our everyday infrastructure? So in doing so, this ties to this campaign because it's like saying that it's totally okay for them to continue to operate in this way. And we're normalizing their presence in our lives. This is similar to how failing to hold the polluters responsible, like completely excuses and normalizes their harm being done. And everyone has expressed this, but the science and our communities have spoken. Like I literally drove through a tornado. I don't think that happens here, which is ridiculous. I know we had a great conversation about that. So surprisingly, it was my second tornado, but that's a different story. So I just kind of want to go over some of the things to extend off what Fiona said, like ways to support this campaign. We are having a party on February 24th. I really hope you can come. It's in Robson Square, 7 to 10 p.m. I think it's the next slide. Yeah. Oh, well, it's related to that. And this party is inspired by this kit. So we made a party kit. We even have like really cool like drinks and stuff. You can look into it. And we have like, we made a Spotify playlist. I'm still working to curate it a little bit more, but you know, you can find this on subicoil.ca. We have a lot of resources. And if you want somebody from the Subic Oil team to come talk at your party and make it a little bit more educational, like we even have things in here that say like, we have like drinks. One of them is like called like something with a keg, but then after that you can have a Subic Oil staffer come tell you about like the campaign, which is really cool. Get some declaration signatures and then go back to partying. And I think that's a really great way to center like joy and resiliency in a very like sad reality. Like this panel has made me upset in many ways, just reinforcing the stories of climate harm and a loss of agency for young people. So participating in this campaign, having a party, let's like have fun with it and like let's do something big. And the last thing I'll say is, other than signing the declaration and joining the Vancouver planning team, I really want to leave people with the message that your political leaders work for you. Like you are their boss, so you need to tell them what's up. Like you need to tell them it's no longer okay to do this. I talked to ADRIANE at an event recently, and we talked for so long about how young people need to feel like their political leaders work for them and they should be able to tell them when they're doing things that are not okay for our future. I know we all want livable futures, so we need to express to the city councillors that this is a non-negotiable situation. It's not up for debate. They need to put this in the city budget and make sure that we have livable futures. So yeah.
So I guess we could also add that your educational institution works for you too. And that if a university declares a climate emergency and has a climate emergency plan, and then researchers turn up fossil fuel industry sponsored research and collaboration, that I really appreciate you bringing that to light. It seems like we need to address hypocrisy and doublespeak wherever we find it. So then just to review, after we storm City Hall, then we party. Okay, I'm keeping my own notes here. So I want to open the floor to questions and discussions, and people on Zoom are sending questions in the chat. I'll kick it off because I haven't been connected to the campaign for a few weeks, because as my students here know, I've been teaching, which is a full contact activity for me. But Andrew and Fiona, for starters, how is the campaign going? There's all kinds of new material since the last time I checked in, and I know that there's lots of local groups that are starting up. It's clearly a setback in Vancouver that we had a council before the last election that was at least 6-5 in favor of getting on board, and now we've got a fight. Fights are good for organizing, and occupying City Hall is just fun, and then the party after, don't forget. But how would you say the campaign is going? What are you feeling in terms of the momentum, and do you have any sort of tales from the field of where the organizing is happening?
I mean, I think we've come a long way, and we have a lot further to go. So we're excited by the sheer number of communities where people are actually organizing around this. We're excited when the folks on Sunshine Coast say, we've been doing door knocking and getting really good response rates for people signing up once they hear about the campaign. We're excited about the house party kit, and I mean, MANVI didn't talk about some of the games that have been developed, but I mean, the Cards Against Climate Change is brilliant. But at the same time, I mean, I think West Coast Environmental Law is not traditionally a grassroots organizing organization. We tend to be focused on policy and or sort of law reform.
Nerd stuff.
We're law nerds,
not like direct action.
I personally feel that I'm learning lots, but also that I have more to learn. So we're relying heavily on Georgia Straight Alliance and other groups that do have more of that depth of knowledge. And I think you're going to see a deepening of that sort of relationship with the grassroots, but we have further to go there, I think.
Mm-hmm.
These groups are coming forward, and we're trying to give support wherever we can. But really getting the numbers of people signing the declaration, and we've got currently 4,000 or so people who have signed, but that's a good start, but a drop in the bucket of where we need to get to. And we're committed to that in the long term. Do you want to say anything?
Sure.
Yeah, it is really exciting to see all these new communities that are getting together and working on this campaign. And another exciting thing has been to speak with city councillors from different communities who are also really interested in the campaign. My only concern is that they're all looking to what other cities are joining and what's happening with Vancouver. And so it's really, really important that Vancouver stays in, or this is our big hope that Vancouver stays in, so that the other cities feel the confidence to come and join in as well. And so that's why it'd be really great if you could add your voice to that, to let City Council know that you think that they should do this, and they should go ahead and hold companies accountable for the climate costs.
Okay, although I do want to say, I don't think we should let's not be devastated if Vancouver votes to take it out. I mean, this is it always was going, if Vancouver hadn't come in, thanks to Adrian's work back in July, we would still be, we always intended to sort of launch really the campaign in its main form after the local government elections in October. And, there's a delegation going to Gibson's in March, and there will be other delegations going forward. We can do this with or without Vancouver.
What's Vancouver? It's a small thing. Actually, speaking.
Actually, if I can just say that, and first of all, the big disclaimer: I have nothing to do with any kind of civil disobedience action or occupation.
Come on, Adrian. There's no cameras here.
Process, but one thing you should know is I've thought through what is a backup if there is this concern of ABC councillors around their budget. In my mind, I have, and I signaled this to them. So again, don't be surprised if this is what happens. Although I'm going to table my motion to amendment to put the money in the budget. If an ABC councillor were to table an amendment that says, no, we're not putting it in the budget this year because the joint action lawsuit is not happening imminently, but we're not backing out of a commitment in the future. So Vancouver stays in the game, but just doesn't put money in now. I'd be okay with that because that at least leaves it all open and it's only going to get worse out there. So one thinks the impetus to sue big oil, the costs are going to mount for us. So just, you know, that's a tactic that
That's great. And I think the question of fiscal prudence and financial responsibility is it's not a feature of a lot of environmental campaigns in this way. And there's this, you know, slight frisson to be on the left of the political world and be talking about fiscal prudence. It's kind of exciting.
It's so fun to go to a council and say, you would be fiscally irresponsible if you don't do this.
But it's true. I mean, the sums are staggering. And I think that, you know, you look at the areas that were flooded in the big floods a November ago, and it's billions of dollars of infrastructure. If you want to protect the Sumas Prairie, important agricultural land, you know, it's not just fixing the pump every time the prairie floods. We're talking about generational infrastructure investments, and they're coming whether we like it or not. They're already here. And so the notion that we should go after the money where it's pooled at the top of the economy, it seems like this could be a kind of a post or beyond ideological question, because I do see in municipal governments, this is a question for anyone on the panel who wants to grab it, the kind of notion of fiscal responsibility is kind of more in the conservative world of political messaging. And this is something that's aimed at that idea that there are costs and that we have to bear them. And how are we going to responsibly govern when we at the local level don't have that kind of money? So does anyone want to speak to that question of how it's framed? Because it's a kind of, it's interesting. It's a kind of in your face activist message. Sue big oil sounds confrontational. And at the same time, we're saying, but it's kind of fiscally prudent.
Yeah. Pay back the money the taxpayers have shelled out for the damage you've caused. I think it's really important to recognize that the damages are different from and paying for the cost to repair the impact of climate change is different than taking responsibility for mitigating the climate crisis. So in other words, reducing our GHGs. You'll often hear politicians at the local level say this. It's not our responsibility. This is a federal responsibility or a provincial responsibility. But we have most of the infrastructure in our jurisdiction, and the infrastructure is what's getting impacted. So the costs are being borne by us in that regard. And I have to say, you have to keep repeating it over and over. It is everyone's responsibility, not just every level of government, but every corporation, every business, every family, every person's responsibility to do what they can to stop the accelerating climate crisis.
Yeah. You know, the jurisdiction thing just gets under my skin because I think people don't understand why we're suing the fossil fuel industry, because you can't have the jurisdiction to spend public money, but not the jurisdiction to try and get it back when someone else has caused it. But on the question of how this works across the political spectrum, I mean, we've done some polling on this, and it is actually very interesting. You know, there are groups on the progressive side that really have bought into this as everyone's responsibility, who actually don't like this campaign. And conversely, there are some groups on the right that actually totally get, you know, this is a non-governmental solution, non-big government solution to climate change. They totally get it. And in fact, we've seen polls that have suggested that there is, although the support is for suing big oil is much, much higher on, you know, the progressive parties or whatever, there is actually fair levels of support for it among conservative parties, more conservative parties. So that always fascinates me.
Yeah.
Oh,
Also,
but I will say it's crucial. I'm sorry. I mean, it's crucial when we talk about this, that we make sure people understand that the alternative is that the taxpayers are paying 100%.
Yeah.
And it's about fair share.
That's what's
Because-
happening now.
Because I mean, if you just say Subig, it's one of the challenges of our campaign. Subig Oil, we wanted to be out there, be very clear about what we wanted. And I'm not apologetic for that at all. But some people make their own assumptions about why we're suing and don't realize that it's because the alternative is that they pay. The fossil fuel industry doesn't pay.
yeah, no worries. I was just also going to say, like, what is the cost of a human life? Like, how many lives have we lost and billions of marine animals, like in the last year? It is completely devastating. So if you could email your city council and talk about your personal narrative of how this affected your life, I think that is one of the most convincing ways, like humanize this crisis. It is not just like the numbers are really important and I don't minimize that, but it's like when you're reaching to people, the communication framing that's found to be some of the most effective, like Yale Climate Communications has great work coming out about this, but it's like the emotional element is really one way to connect people and make people intrinsically care about it. So all of you in this room clearly already care about it, which is great, but like, how do you activate other people to care about it? That means getting personal. And I think that means like storytelling. So, talk about the human elements. And that's one way to really reach people, I think, with this campaign, particularly with this city council, like talk about the people that are like the most vulnerable, that have to pay the climate cost more than any other subpopulation as well. So if city council cares about, like the people on the downtown east side, like they're saying, like tell them that these people are additionally vulnerable because of the structures
Extra
and inequities.
vulnerable. Yeah.
So like humanize the crisis, I think.
MANVI, spoken like a true organizer. And I want to follow up on that, because one of the other things that strikes me, and we've talked about this in our studies a fair amount, is that people need a way to process the anxiety and the grief that they're feeling. There's a kind of a claustrophobia when we think about how the world is falling apart. And what I've seen on the Sunshine Coast is a really kind of beautiful thing where we got together in someone's yard and we just made our plans and we divided into subgroups. Okay, a little nerdy there, but like somebody was really excited on like gathering all the good articles and all the ammos. Like, okay, you do that, get all the links together. Someone else wanted to go to the farmer's market and just stand in front of the big, excellent graphic and talk to people all day, in the rain because BC. And that was amazing. It was an incredible experience. And so we started as a very small group, and now we're dozens of people, and we've done all kinds of different things that really built that connective tissue of community around the organizing. And I know that the folks in that group just feel better to be doing something. So do you want to share any reflections as an organizer about the other rewards beyond the goal of a campaign like this, just in terms of how we deal with the world that we live in?
I mean, like I can say for a fact, like Climate Emergency Week plug, it's this week. I mean, Climate Hub and all the other groups that I'm aware of are doing such a fantastic job, like organizing events. And one thing that you kind of see as a common thread, you can see with the heart installation. I know Megan talked about this at the event that was on Monday as well. People are trying to share, instances of hope and connectivity. And like you said, the connective tissue, like when young people are feeling like overwhelmed by this crisis and feel like our city councilor is deciding our future through these municipal decisions and we don't have a say because they're voting willy-nilly and they're not listening to us. When we feel that way, it is like you feel hopeless. And so ways to feel more like you have a future is by getting involved and organizing. And it looks different for everybody, but places like UBC are like wonderful places to start, and campaigns that are so accessible, like Subig Oil, pretty much it's an open call. If you want to get involved, you can get involved at any level. And I think that is like the beauty of local boots on the ground municipal organizing. You can have a meal and share stories and find ways to, like the whole party thing actually came about over the summer. We went to this like climate leaders retreat at Hollyhock and we were just chatting over a meal and we said, wouldn't it be fun if we had a party because everything's so sad, and like that's how this whole campaign came about. And now we're having a party. I mean, it took a while, but we're doing it. So, and I think it's a great example with the climate strikes in September. Like it was a block party. It wasn't like we're gonna hold signs and it was like we're collectively getting together. We're organizing. We're energized, and I think that makes us feel stronger. We have we have the numbers, we have the passion. Like let's do it. And I think we can do it. So get behind campaigns like this. And you read that, maybe some of you have read the statistics, but so many percent emissions happen at the municipal level. Like this is that area that it's so underrepresented in our minds when we, begin to get engaged with this work. We think federal, provincial, but like municipal, like these are the people that like they are directly accountable to you. You can say, I'm a constituent, I live in your neighborhood and my neighborhood's not doing well. So you have to fix it because I hired you to do that. So that's where I think community organizing at the local level brings us all together, and it's hope
I
affirming.
see a wry smile from Adrian when she hears talk like that. Yep, I hear that a few dozen times a day. I'm going to bring in a few Zoom questions and then ask for questions from the room. So this is an easy one, MANVI, while you still have the mic. Someone watching on the Zoom wanted to know what was the name of the research report about UBC.
Yes, it's called Complicity in the Climate Crisis, an investigation into the links between the fossil fuel industry and UBC. And you can find it on climatejusticeubc.ca/report. But I can also, like if you go on Climate Hub's website, I believe it's linked there, and Climate Justice UBC, if you Google it, I'm sure you'll come across their website, and it's the report link.
Excellent.
And one of the companies you mentioned was Tech. I'd just like to say Tech is in chronic non-compliance with BC's environmental laws. They have been for years. So if you're taking money from, UBC is taking money from an environmental criminal.
They suck.
Just don't pull your punches though, okay? Because we want to know what you really feel. One question from Valerie on Zoom, I think we've already answered, is the petition for Vancouver residents only. And it's not, it's all across BC. Everyone lives in a municipal
Well, the
jurisdiction.
big oil declaration is for everyone across BC, but what about the?
It's really helpful if we can differentiate those from outside of BC from inside Vancouver. It really weights more on councillors when it's their constituents. So I don't know if we can differentiate the list. Like there's so many because your
Yeah.
address is on it when
Well,
you
for
sign.
big oil, we can, but do you want people signing your petition that you brought today
Oh,
if they're not from Vancouver?
I think this is not about the petition in the room because it's a question from someone watching on Zoom.
Okay, then
and they're thinking about
the
the
big oil
Subig oil.
declaration is for, people from beyond BC have signed it too, and that's fine. But
Well-
really, we especially want people in BC.
That is the next question from Alicia on Zoom, who's in Montreal, saying what, are there ways for people in jurisdictions outside of BC to support? I think this is where you make the pitch for like, send us money or
Yes.
something.
Always. But I mean, yeah, so I mean, the Super Oil campaign is focused in BC for several different reasons. A major one is that BC's class action legislation protects municipalities from having to pay the other side's legal fees if they lose, which is not a feature of class action legislation outside of BC. I think at a broad level, this conversation of how do we pay for this and what's the, can we sue fossil fuel companies should be happening in communities across the country and around the world, quite frankly. So I certainly would encourage, people in Montreal, and if they have a group that wants to take this on in a big way, we're happy to talk to them and share resources. House parties are certainly not
Jurisdiction specific? No.
Jurisdiction specific. So there's lots that can be done. I think, I mean, in terms of supporting what's being done here specifically, if you're on the list, you'll get our emails and you can certainly send emails, even if you're not from a municipality to that municipality. I don't think it hurts.
Great.
And we'd love to have your love at any rate. Yeah.
Stefan, do you have any thoughts on the other jurisdictions in Canada?
Yeah, so I was just going to add that aside from the point that Andrew just made about protection against the sort of unexpected costs if you lose, the legal basis for such actions is pretty much similar across Canada. Now with Quebec, there's in question of civil law, and I'm not a civil law person, but the other provinces also have class action legislation that facilitates these sorts of claims. And in Quebec, one key difference with the other provinces of Canada is in Quebec, there is a quasi-constitutional right to a healthy environment in the Quebec Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Section 41, I think it is. And so, yeah, I think anyone outside BC should be interested in convincing their local politicians that this is a good idea there and looking for environmental law organizations that are sort of analogous to West Coast environmental law that might help to point them in the right direction.
And that's why we always have a law professor on the panel.
We do, and we do have polling from across the country that suggests that support for suing fossil fuel companies is actually highest in Quebec.
Sure, that makes total
So,
sense.
there also was a motion, Toronto actually got a legal opinion done on their options for suing, but I think that there's been the political pressures dropped off there. So if anyone's listening from Toronto and wants.
Well,
to-
they've only got like 3 councillors left, so that's a problem there. Did you want to add anything? Okay. Questions in the room? And I'm going to go to Sarah at the back, but you start at the front. Yep, yep. I can repeat the question from here for the Zoom folks, yeah.
Like political spectrum, the like provincial NDP has been like very big on their ideas of being for the people, for the taxpayers, for doing or like going against big like petroleum conglomerates. I'm just wondering, has there been any like dialogue between Two Big Oil and the municipal level and movements, as well as like provincial government? Because although there has been a lot of, is it just more blah 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 and promises? And not actually taken, or are they actually convening with more grassroots initiatives to hold these corporations accountable?
I'm just going to summarize for the Zoom audience that it's a question about whether there's been any connection between the campaign and the NDP government here in BC.
Yeah, and I would say not since we did the formal launch of Two Big Oil back in June. But prior to that there had been discussions with a few different government ministers and MLAs. There was not a lot of interest in moving forward. So I mean, it's one of the reasons. I mean, I think, you know, legally there are reasons that actually make a lot of sense for a provincial government to bring a case of this type, but it has not been clear that there was an openness, and it's much easier for us to organize at a local government level and then use that momentum to perhaps take the issue back to the province when we're in a stronger position.
Fiona?
I was just going to add that also, I think those conversations with the province happened before so many of the more recent devastating climate change impacts that we've experienced. And so I think we're planning to approach them again at some point. And, you know, maybe there is more interest now that they're having to foot the bill, they're having to, or help like so many communities, and they also can't afford the skyrocketing cost of climate change when you look at the floods in Abbotsford. And
Of course, they have a new Minister of Climate Resilience.
yes,
So, you know,
yeah.
Oh, yeah, yep, absolutely. Go ahead, Sarah.
Why don't we take the microphone?
Sure. There are dangers with that plan, but let's go with it.
Thank you. Then I,
Oh, no, you don't want this one with a mic. Oh, boy, see?
well, I'm gonna do that annoying thing where I ask 2 questions. So then you don't have to repeat them. all.
You can ask up to 3 and we'll answer one.
The first one is motivated by, I was sitting in this room a couple weeks ago, watching a climatologist talk about the causal links between climate and extreme events, and actually the sort of increasing levels of uncertainty that we have for different kinds of extreme events. And to my surprise, you know, wildfire was kind of the ones that have maybe a higher level of uncertainty simply by virtue of the fact that any event that involves multiple causal agents, you know, high winds, heat, drought, pests, et cetera, just in terms of how we think about uncertainty in that sense, you know, becomes anyway, like higher in that regard. So I guess my first question is like, does it, in terms of the kind of causality that we have to demonstrate in a legal process for like a nuisance claim or something like this, does it matter what kind of impacts we're talking about, what kind of climate impacts we're talking about in terms of how easy it is to make that causal case in a legal process? And then the second question is just about precedents for big lawsuits like this actually paying out, you know? So I'm thinking of like the Exxon Valdez, you know, which was the largest punitive damages. It was like $5 billion. Exxon fought it for decades. They ended up paying like $500 million, you know? So where do we see precedents for campaigns like this in terms of like, yeah, how—
Show us the money.
Yeah, show us the money. But I also just want to say that I hope those didn't sound like pessimistic questions, because I am super excited about this and just absolutely impressed and so excited to get involved. So thank you.
Only better for being able to respond to the critiques, for sure.
So the answer to the first question is yes, but you probably want more than that. So the first question was about causation, and Steph may have thoughts on this as well. But you know, what we view as the low-hanging fruit for this case is adaptation costs. because they are generally, so the costs of building seawalls higher or dealing with rising sea level, the retrofitting, stormwater infrastructure to handle more flood, more severe flood events, because they're not generally aimed at a particular weather event. They are aimed at the shift in how the climate itself is functioning. And that's much easier to link to climate change than, it's also something that all local governments have in common. So it works well for the class action. There is, as I think you're referring to, a fascinating field of weather attribution or climate attribution science, which is increasingly able to draw links. I mean, the heat dome was 150 times more likely due to climate change and 2 degrees warmer as well. And the scientists who calculated that did it in a matter of weeks. They're becoming very quick. And as I understand it, heat is one of the easiest to draw a strong causal link to. Hurricanes are not that that's a problem here generally, but hurricanes are low. But you can often, even though the likelihood of hurricanes is low, you often can show that the amount of weight and precipitation associated with the hurricane or the storm surge as a result of the climate change hurricane is linked to climate change. So even when you can't show that the event itself was climate linked, you may be able to show that the damages are climate linked. And I mean, I don't know about the specifics with wildfires. I do know that there is the study I referred to was that in this? I can't remember if I've heard that today or earlier today or this talk. But the researchers at the University of Victoria did calculate that the 2017 wildfires were 7 to 11 times larger due to climate change. So there are scientists out there who are making that link. It wasn't so much a probabilistic link, but it was a description of the change in the intensity and scale. Okay, and then the other question was the
Money.
how getting the money. Yeah, I mean, there is no doubt that, I mean, first of all, I think there are examples of lawsuits against industry, tobacco, asbestos, you mentioned some of them. But there's no doubt that that getting the money takes time. It's one of the reasons, the best time to file this lawsuit would have been 20 years ago, because then we'd be getting the money now. But at the same time, as I hope I made clear when I was talking, this isn't just about the actual payout at the end of the day. It is about fundamentally reframing this industry and making it clear that they are not responsible, a responsible industry. They're an industry that's bending over backwards to avoid taking responsibility. And we get that benefit both from the public conversation about this type of litigation and from the disclosures that the companies have to file the moment they're sued. And so I think from a sort of, yes, I mean, both goals are real, but from a climate organizing point of view, there are real advantages to this much earlier than the payout. I don't think it should take 20 years to get a payout, but it could take a while. And even then, once you have the order, I'm sure the companies will fight it every way they can.
If I could just, is this one working?
Yep.
Okay, if I could just add also a response to that. I've got another motion that's on the table for council on Tuesday called the costs and benefits of climate action. And my attempt with that, and thank you very much, West Coast Environmental Law, for providing some good insights, input, et cetera, on that motion. The point of that is we need to, as cities, document exactly what the costs are, especially around repair, because that is probably the low-hanging fruit, as you've said, but mitigation as well and adaptation as well. So that is going to, as I say, on the table. And if you sign that petition, I'll let you know about that and how you, because I'll send you links so that you can actually comment to council, not necessarily having to come to speak. And by the way, we now allow all speakers to be virtual. So, and you get called a half an hour beforehand. So you don't have to sit at City Hall for like days, which is really good. Yeah, that's the only good thing about COVID, what it resulted in. But the second thing I want to say really is about the costs and the fact that the costs are so it's so clear to me that the costs that we are bearing we wouldn't be paying them if it weren't for climate change. And they will be escalating. And apropos of your first comment around the science and how are we figuring that part out? Like I said, the money is over here. We're figuring that out. But the science, I don't know if any of you have read the book by John Ecklander called High Tide on Main Street. It is even though it's 10 years old, it's still so totally relevant. It is the best synopsis of the projections and the potential damage and costs related to rising sea level. And it's brilliant. John Ecklander, High Tide on
Good
Main
one.
Street.
Good one.
Brilliant book.
It strikes me that there's a couple of different levels, Sarah, on which the campaign works that I think are just worth highlighting. There's a lot of brass tacks in this campaign. It's got a very specific aim. And I could even see if they're in the class action suit, we'll just put it in the affirmative, in the class action suit, when we win the certification and when it happens, the court will validate the science. These questions will be evaluated by a court of law, and there's a value in being able to make the case in a court of law so that you have a legal precedent that affirms the science and affirms the extent of the damages. But there's another dimension to all of this. And I just say this because this is one of the reasons that I'm so excited about this campaign. A couple of years ago, there was a giant interdisciplinary study led by Kevin Anderson, one of the great climate scientists, that asked the question, why haven't we as a global community bent the curve on emissions in 30 years of knowing what the solutions were? And why haven't we done it? Why haven't we bent the curve? And the answer, and they had, political economists and scientists and sociologists. It was a huge interdisciplinary effort. But it all boils down to power. The power of the entrenched interests in the fossil fuel industry and their allies, or you could say employees in the political class, is stopping change. And there has to be a global effort to delegitimize the sources of power that are blocking change. The best estimates are we have maybe 6 years, 6.5 years, if you combine the different data sets of carbon budget left before we blow past 1.5 degrees of warming. The time is incredibly tight. And the industry is on a drunken power trip. After $200 billion last year, they're pulling back from even their modest commitments to change. And there needs to be fronts to fight the entrenched interests that are blocking progress. And this is an amazing one. It's not the only one. It can't be the only one. But in addition to the very specific offer to municipal politicians, do the right thing, be responsible. We need the money because my road got flooded out in that last rain and somebody had to come and put it back. That's us. That's our local tax base. That's like our local community concern. That's fantastic. That's a material level on which this campaign works extremely well. But there is an existential level to it too. And it's a rallying cry for people who want to fight the bigger battle. And I think we can't lose touch with that. We're actually running to the end of our time together. I personally have a ferry to catch, so I'm going to be rude and run for the door. But there's more food to be eaten, so nobody leave, because we don't want to leave. I mean, we're not going to waste food here tonight, right? And there are students. There are students students and food go together. They need each other. But let's take one last question and then we'll wrap.
Relationships that big oil has very deep pockets, and but one of the relationships that I really want to see dealt with or possibly given a big deal, and that is the corporations of lobbyists that are so fundamental. Each of the governing parties that have existed in BC over the last while have alumni MLAs and MPs that are continually lobbying them for oil and gas corporations. And this is something I'm just wondering, will they be possibly an area of the suit that might be chilled by being included?
There's an interesting legal avenue, a chill effect on lobbying. Never thought of that. Nice.
So I mean, one of the things they're lobbying for are subsidies, and I think that there's a direct connection between the lawsuit and subsidies in the sense that it delegitimizes the idea we're giving money to companies that we're having to sue. And I mean, if you look at what happened to Big Tobacco, their subsidies dried up once they were sued. But they still have lobbyists even now. Big Tobacco still has lobbyists.
But fewer,
I think it probably are fewer.
smaller expense accounts,
Yeah.
worse
What I
restaurants.
do think is true is what I do think is true is that one of the, in order for this case to be successful, I mean, there's a small version of the case that could be successful just based on the emissions from these companies themselves. But really, what we're going after is we're saying that these companies are responsible not just for their own operations, but they sold a product that they knew was going to cause harm. So they're responsible for the harm too, from the products. And to do that, you have to show, ideally, you show that they knew that they were causing the harm and that it's inherent in the product, in the product. But one of the other ways you can get to that liability is by showing that they took positive action that kept the nuisance going. And the deception is clearly part of that narrative, but so are the lobbyists. The fact that the lobbyists were undermining action on climate change so their clients could make money is not illegal per se, but it's part of the context about why they are responsible for this, for what happens with their products and why they're responsible for this nuisance. So it's not entirely separate, but I wouldn't say that it's going to eliminate oil and gas company lobbyists anytime soon either.
But you'll see them at White Spot after this. Okay, that's all the time we have. People are going to mill around. Linda's coming up. I want to thank our panelists for a fantastic job.
I certainly want to thank our panelists. That was fascinating. And I think everyone's convinced this is a campaign that you should join and that we can win. And the lawsuit is going to happen and it's going to win. And why not set up a friendly rivalry across Canada? Shouldn't Vancouver beat Montreal? To the Montreal listeners,
Yeah.
Toronto listeners, come on, Vancouver, we can do it. We can be number one. I'm from the Sustainability Hub upstairs here. We are one of the sponsors of this event during Climate Emergency Week Plus. We have other sponsors, and the main sponsor and organizer is the Geography Climate Action Committee here at UBC, Professor Nina Hewitt. Really happy about that. The Center for Climate Justice. We have the Center for the Law and the Environment. We have, of course, West Coast Environmental Law, my old home. And so happy to have everyone here. Couple more thank yous. We'll let you go. Don't worry, Abby. I want to thank everybody on the tech team. I want to thank Tim.
Thanks, Jim.
I want to thank John and Natalie upstairs, everybody who did organization. I want to thank the students who've helped. I want to thank Tabitha.
Thanks, Tabitha.
And all the other students who've helped us organize this week and every week. We do it. We rely on you and your passion to keep us going. So thanks so much. And finally, of course, I want to thank our speakers. We have a small token of appreciation for all of you. It's been wonderful to have you here. So thanks for joining us and come back soon.